Hi, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This seat taken.
Hey, Kiernan.
Ryan.
How are you? It's been a while.
We're back.
We are slowly meandering back.
I feel like I'm vibrantly marching back. I think about it, straight backed, head held up high, my chin in the air. I'm proud and I'm ready, refreshed from a summer. It's like every summer, we all know, going down to the local lemonade stand, hanging out with the family and friends on the beach, backyard barbecues. Everything's normal and just as pleasant as it ever was.
Totally normal. It doesn't feel like we're just in a train, just veering towards, the end times.
Now, it does sound... Now that you mention zooming on a train, your audio does sound weirdly like you might be in some sort of capsule or enclosed space. Is something wrong with your professional podcast microphone, which we always use?
I'm on right now. I'm on my amateur Apple earphones because I'm in the great city of Nashville.
Now I'm confused by so many parts of this because I feel that there are travel restrictions. So we're going to have to tackle why you're in Nashville. But also I could swear earlier when you said you were going to the Great Smoky Mountains, you were very excited. You said, and I'm going for such a long time. I'll be sure to pack my fancy microphone so that we can do podcasts from there.
Well, I should have listened to the podcast on how to pack, because then I would have made a better list and not just sort of thrown a bunch of stuff in and forgot about my...
Do we have a how to pack episode?
We must have. That would have been like one of the first 10 we did.
It does feel like we should, but I have to say, I think we're on episode 83 now. I don't remember a how to pack episode.
Well, then I dreamed up an entire episode that we recorded because I'm sure we did like a packing 101 or I'm sure they're like a three P's to packing.
It definitely feels like something I would have suggested in the early days. But I'm pretty sure the only luggage-specific episode we did was the luggage throwdown.
Well, then you can't blame me for not knowing how to pack because we haven't even covered it.
Yeah, I think you're right that this is an upcoming episode. Well, listen, today's episode, it's gonna be this. We have a lot of housekeeping to do. It's been a number of weeks since we've recorded and put out a podcast, and
we've been so busy doing these virtual experiences. I mean, I've been doing 2 or 3 a day.
What Ryan is referring to is. You should save this for recalculating, really. But we can have it up right on the top here, which is for several episodes before our summer break. There, we said the next episode, which would be this episode, was going to be Ryan and I each doing one virtual experience. So on Airbnb and Rick Steves with his guides and a number of other travel sites have created virtual experiences for all of us who can't travel, where a guide might take you through a famous museum or out to the local city streets and sites on a cell phone and give a tour. And I don't know what it is about these, but Ryan, you and I seem incapable of making ourselves do these virtual tours.
How to pack a suitcase. We did do it.
Oh my God.
We didn't do it that long ago either. That's one of the crazy things. Anyway.
Wait, how long ago was it?
It was like 3 months ago.
Episode what?
Oh gosh, I've just lost it again. But we did. I guess it wasn't 3 months ago. It looks like it was 3 months ago. At November the 12th, 2019.
Oh, okay. This was one of the first episodes.
How to pack a suitcase. Yeah.
Wait, 2019?
Yeah, 2019. Yeah.
So it wasn't near the beginning. What's that? Probably episode
We have now done enough episodes where you can't be sure if we've covered a topic or not.
Oh, I feel that way all the time. Don't you ever go to the website, outofofficepod.com, and just look at all the back episodes? It's hard to remember doing all of these. We've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah, we have been.
So what is it about these virtual experiences that I feel like our bodies are rejecting them?
Well, I think it's because for me, my work life right now is a virtual experience. And so I'm on Zoom or Google Video or WebEx, or God forbid, another even
Teams.
yes, something even more awful for 9 hours a day, right? So getting off of my laptop, I'm not like, hey, why don't I go on a virtual tour on my laptop?
Right.
You know, it's like,
right.
I rather just walk around my suburban Nashville neighborhood for an hour, than that.
For me, it's the same. It's sort of like by the end of the exhaustion of the day, I don't really want to like talk to a tour guide via Skype, which is basically what they are. Now, I will say I have friends whose judgments I trust who say that they have actually had pretty good experiences on a few of these, but I just can't bring myself to believe it.
Yeah, I can't bring myself to believe it either. I reached out to Tommy Wallach, who did our episode.
Escape Rooms.
Yeah, on Escape Rooms.
One of my favorite episodes.
And
that's an episode I remember.
That's a great episode. And I said, Tommy, what's a virtual experience as somebody who knows a lot about this, would you recommend? And he said, none of them. I wouldn't recommend any of them.
Oh, so, all right.
Yeah, I just think it is.
Wow, and that's from a guy whose job is writing escape rooms.
And obviously, he's thinking about this stuff, right? Because he's got a in-person escape room that's open, but people are slow to go back to things like that.
I remember after that episode, we both said this guy seems to be making money hand over fist. We really missed the escape room opportunity here, and now. Guess what? Podcast's still doing great in these these pandemic times. Escape room, not so much. So
these days, escape room means like, can I escape my house? Can I escape my office?
Can I escape any room I am in? All right. Well, Ryan, we actually do have a fair amount of business to attend to because we've been off air for a few weeks. I feel that we need to catch up on where we've been, because you and I have each figured out a way to do some modest traveling, even during the pandemic times. Thank God, because we were safe traveling. Safe traveling. We were really going a little stir crazy and nuts, and so I do feel that we need to recount some of those, tease up some of the episodes that are going to be coming in the next few weeks. We've got recalculatings, things that we have to follow up on. We've got a quest for Rick Steves and several updates there. And then we're going to round it out with the traditional last stop. So listen, I think we got to get going. Let's kick it off with a recalculating. Recalculating. All right, Ryan. Now, do you remember what recalculating is? I know summer break, your brain can atrophy a bit.
When you make a mistake, we come back and we address it at a later episode.
Sometimes I make mistakes, sometimes you make a mistake, but also recalculating is, it's not always a judgment on a mistake. Sometimes it's just revisiting a topic that we've discussed in the past and adding some further context, further color, further commentary and thoughts. And today's happily falls in under that category. So we've got two things that we need to follow up and recalculate on. The first is, do you remember one of my last stops in the episodes before the break was recommending a podcast called Park Predators?
Yes, I do remember Park Predators. It tied in my love of true crime podcast with national parks and state parks. So it was a good fit for the pod.
It was a good fit for the pod. And at the time, I had listened to a couple episodes and I was enjoying them well enough. And you, who I think were a little further on in the pod, were starting to rightfully criticize a few bits and pieces about the way it's constructed. And I have to say, I continue to listen to it every week. And this recalculating is to say I really made a mistake by recommending it in that last stop. It is not a good podcast.
It has fallen from the top 40 podcast to it's no longer on that list. So I no longer keep up. I don't know if it's even done its run yet, but it got so repetitive.
Yeah, it's not done with its run yet. It's still going, and I kind of dread it coming into my feed every week. You'll recall the best part, and the part that is still very good, is its theme song. But everything from the research to the writing to the stories it chooses just is really, really off.
Yeah, I stopped after the fourth or the fifth episode, pretty soon after we talked about it, because it's the repetitive nature of finding people who went hiking and never returned, as that's every single story. It just got a little,
that was so every story has that same framing device. I also find it really strange that like all these stories are like one-off murders from the 80s or 90s. So like they feel very disconnected from like today. And I'm not total like, don't crimes still happen in national parks? I'm not sure why you got to go back. If you have to go back to the 80s to find the murder, I'm not sure that this is actually a trend.
And it's not like they're using cool 80s music, like a lot of the 80s themed, like
no, it's not. It's not like Stranger Things fun. I mean that I could be on board with.
No, it's not. If they added like the upside down to, maybe a little more interesting.
But another thing, as it's gone further on, one of the things, I'm a national parks nut. Of course, I'm enthusiastic about any new content that brings me a part of the parks that I don't often think about. And I thought, okay, crime and murder in the parks, that's interesting. But as the episodes go on, a lot of this stuff doesn't even happen in the parks.
No, the park will be like, somebody went hiking and then, 4 days later they were at a McDonald's and they vanished.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or there's one episode where they just asked, like there was a murder in the town that was outside of Yellowstone and they borrowed some like search dogs from Yellowstone National Park. That's like the only reference to the park in the episode. And also, I'm pretty sure that the writer doesn't know what the national parks are because there's an episode recently. It's all about the Mojave Desert. And, the Mojave Desert is not a national park.
Well, they don't. Do they say national parks or do they say parks? It's not national park predators. It's park predators.
That is a very interesting.
And as you know, there's a lot of great state parks where I'm sure predators have been. Why just pigeonhole yourself to national parks?
So I definitely think you're right that there are great state parks, and people who are interested in that can go back to one of the best interviews in the archive with Peter Kujawinski of the New York Times, who visited and studied state parks all around the United States. And I am looking, there is some slippery language here in the description. All right, so first, on the official Park Predators website, pretty good tagline. Sometimes the most beautiful places hide the darkest secrets.
Oh, I like that. We could use that for Out of Office.
That's very
Out of Office nighttime edition. Like the.
We already have our tagline. Thank you very much. This seat taken, and we've got a great one in the hopper just in case that one falls flat. Pack your bags, Buster Brown.
I knew that was coming.
Either one of the best, or an oral experience. All right, God, how is it that on their Parks Predator website there's no about us or description of what the podcast is?
But to be fair, we also claim to be a travel podcast, and this year there hasn't been much traveling. I have to say.
We're gonna fix that. What? Oh, God, it doesn't seem like they offer a description. Amazingly, even on Apple Podcasts, their description is just that tagline. How can that be?
Well, their name is pretty descriptive.
Yeah. So what I'm seeing is in all the really notable podcast coverage, they say national parks and forest areas. So it does
forest areas.
Yeah.
So it could be like somebody's backyard.
It's kind of a well, and I feel that the creator, whose name is Delia Dombra, she's really she's taking some how do you say that? She's taking some liberties with how we define a park. And then, Ryan, the big criticism that I have of the show, our show, for example, super tightly scripted. We put in probably 8 to 15 hours a week scripting each one of these lines. Like, when I even the or the pauses, that is all like Pinter would write into his script. Pinter, exactly. Many of our reviews on Apple Podcasts, which, by the way, largely 5 stars and well over 100, but we encourage you to go give us more. Many compare us to Pinter plays. And for example, one scripted moment might be when I end this sentence, I know that Ryan's going to say,
Out of Office, a travel podcast.
Okay, Ryan went back to the top of the script by accident. Okay, So, but the writing itself of these episodes is really, really painful.
So what I'm taking from this is you don't really like the writing.
I don't really like the writing. I think the research is fine, but I don't think the crimes are that interesting. And the fall off in the listenership or attention that they're getting that you're describing, it's well deserved. It was a great premise. I think it's very disappointing. So I am recalculating. I'm taking back that last stop of Park Predators, but I still do like the theme song.
Unsubscribe.
Now, Ryan, another thing that we have to recalculate on is a few episodes back, we discussed that there was a survey among museums about how they were weathering the pandemic. And there was a very troubling statistic about how much small museums are struggling and how many might even be driven to shut down. And so you and I each vowed, we promised here on the podcast that we would, before this podcast, donate to a small museum. And that, we're not giving to MoMA or the Met or the Louvre. Those places are doing fine. And I have a real soft spot for quirky museums.
Sure. I made a joke about a bad joke at a museum just a couple of days ago in Nashville. I was speaking with the guy who worked there, and we had just toured, and he was talking about in the 1970s he had majored in museum sciences and museum studies, and he's been working with this museum, and we'll talk about it on a later pod for a really long time. And he said that back in the 70s, a new museum was opening in the world every 3 days, and I said, this year, a museum is closing every 3 days, and it didn't go over as well as I thought it would.
Wow.
Yeah.
See, that's a read your audience sort of moment. People who
I thought it was clever, frankly. But
it's very clever, and I appreciate it, and I'm sure the audience is loving it. But I do think that anyone who has paid good money to study museum sciences isn't going to find the destruction of museums to be that funny.
Wasn't college mostly free in the 70s? So,
the boomers did all right. So Ryan, now I have a feeling that you probably forgot to do this, but I'm hoping you tell me I'm wrong.
I made a donation.
Okay.
To a museum. First off, how much did you decide to donate?
I opened up the pocketbook pretty big. I bet you because you have this perception that I'm cheap, even though I'm doing fine. Even though you have this perception, you probably thought I was talking about giving like $5 or $6. I gave $60. I'm proud to say $60.
I went a little bit further than you. I gave $61, but I did that only after learning that you gave $60.
Oh, all right. All right. Yeah. Well, you've got that vape money from all that time you spent working at a vape company. Yeah. Look it up, people. It's true. It's real. And this is staying in.
So I decided to give to a museum in New York City called the Leslie-Lohman Museum of Art. And the Leslie-Lohman Museum of Art is located in Soho, and it is the only museum, one of the only museums in the world to focus exclusively on LGBTQ artists. Wow. And they've been around since, I think, like 1970 in some form or another. But over the years, the collection has grown, and obviously it's a very cool space. And you can go, it's not open right now due to COVID, but typically you can show up, and it's admission is free, but as suggested donation of $10. And they always have some fantastic, queer artists that you probably haven't heard of or don't know about, or they're highlighting some moment in history or some cultural event. So it's a very cool space, and they always have a couple exhibits. So Leslie-Lohman Museum, happy to donate to them, and looking forward to when they open up again.
And where is it in New York?
It's in Soho, 26 Oyster Street.
Oh, wow. You had that right on the tip of your tongue.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, now you may remember, we've done several episodes on historic houses, historic homes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And do you remember how I like to judge a historic home?
The Kiernan system for home historic home judgment. Yeah. It's if you can drop Kieran into any room in the house, take the blindfold off.
Yeah, I'm blindfolded. So when
yeah.
you say it, you have to make clear when I drop in and I'm blindfolded.
Well, I assume that
I don't just
people
walk,
know you.
I don't just walk around
blind. Yeah, you're like the character in Bird Box. You're just always blindfolded. So you're blindfolded anytime you're dropped into someplace, you're going to be confused, right? So you're dropped in blindfolded or not.
Yeah.
But you can see immediately Johnny Cash's guitar or Michael Jackson's Toddlers or whatever it is that tip you off.
Ryan, these are politically sensitive times.
I know.
Yes. The goal of a great historic home in my mind is that I want to be able to look around the room and based on the artifacts and personality of the room, be able to tell you whose home it is. And that's how I evaluate a great home. And there's a great historic home out in Cape Cod that I have not yet been to, but I really want to go to. And I have plans to go this fall. And so it was partially a selfish donation because I really want this place to stay open.
Right.
And it is a historic home, and it is the historic home of an artist named Edward Gorey, the Edward Gorey House. Now, do you know the Edward Gorey House?
Oh, well, I don't know the Edward Gorey House, but you and I have talked about Edward Gorey quite a bit because there was that off-Broadway musical, The Gorey Details.
The Gorey Details, Gorey.
Yeah. So that's what turned me on first to Gorey and his stories and his illustrations. Is the house creepy and crazy? I mean, you haven't been.
Yes, it's creepy and crazy. So for anyone who doesn't know Edward Gorey, he has a very particular drawing style. He's deceased now. He's not living in the house that's next to me. And he's known for this very kind of Gothic Victorian aesthetic. And has a very odd, off sense of humor. He was famous for living in New York City and never missing a performance of the New York City Ballet. He was extremely devoted to the ballet, and his drawings look almost like, I don't know, how do you call it? Like it's like the style.
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard for me to disconnect it from him. It's like this macabre sort of...
Yes, macabre is a good way to say it. Edward Gorey was an illustrator. He did a lot of book covers when he was first being discovered and coming up. And I actually collect and have a small collection of these antique book covers that he did. And it's it's a lot of precise lines and shading. And his most famous work is called the Gashlycrumb Tinies, which are this very macabre collection. It's A, B, C through Z. Each letter gets a child's name and how that child died, and then there's a small illustration of how they died. Again, people, it's dark. And
that's super famous. I've seen that.
Yeah. And he's got this cult following. I'm a big fan. He was a real collector of books and things, and so the house is apparently just overflowing with this ephemera. And he lived in New York City for many, many years of his life. Then he moved out to Yarmouth, which is out on Cape Cod in Massachusetts, and he's famous for strolling the in this thick, giant fur coat. So he had this kind of long beard and these glasses. He was a very iconic man. And in fact, I'll post it to the Instagram at OOO Podcast.
Was he a confirmed bachelor?
He was a confirmed old bachelor. That's exactly right, Ryan. Good guess.
Yeah, well, the fur coat gave it away.
The fur coat gave it away. What are you saying about my fur coat? So I gave it to the Edward Gorey House. I'm super excited about visiting this fall. And it felt really good to feel like we're helping keep some of these special places open. And Ryan, I must say, I am proud of you for picking an interesting museum and remembering to give. And I just gave $2 more to the Edward Gorey House. So it's sad that you couldn't open your pocketbook a little further.
Well, we want folks to email us and let us know what museums that you've given us a donation to over this quarantine COVID period.
That would be at outofofficepod@gmail.com.
You can also slide into your DMs at OOO Podcast on Instagram if you have that.
Absolutely. Just slip right in there. Okay. Now, Ryan, we finished off the recalculating. I realized we're not even really going to be taking off here.
No, I mean, we're not advising folks travel by plane right now.
No, that's true. Maybe we could do a takeoff when we talk about where each of us are in the episodes that are coming up, because I love that sound effect.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we have Archie to put it in there, so we might as well use it.
Archie, of course, the name of our editor. Thank you, Archie. We're glad to be putting you back to work. And if anybody has a podcast that you need edited, we would highly recommend Archie. Please feel free to email us at outofofficepod@gmail.com. And you know what, Archie? If we ever make any money off the pod, maybe we'll get a better editor. I don't know. It's just a joke. It's just a joke. You're a great editor. And you don't listen to the episodes anyway, so you won't hear any of this. Now, Ryan, we do have a quest for Rick Steves that I feel is very important. So let's get to that. Sadly, we still don't have a sound effect for the quest for Rick Steves. But Ryan, can you describe why we call it the quest for Rick Steves?
I feel like the quest for Rick Steves should just be you, like, charging at a windmill.
Gosh. I mean, it is starting to feel that way. I had a lot of hope that we would have him on by now, particularly once the pandemic started.
Yeah.
But for folks who don't know, Rick Steves is a TV travel personality. He writes a bunch of guidebooks. They have great kind of distinctive green bindings. You find him at any bookstore. And he is a PBS personality and a really great match for the show. But his PR people just don't see it. And we've been rejected. So we continue to be on a quest for Rick Steves to get Rick Steves to come here in studio and have a conversation with us. And in that quest, I like to give updates about what Rick Steves has been up to. And we have a couple Rick Steves themed episodes that I'm hoping might catch his eye someday. Yeah, a couple. We have a love letter for Rick Steves, and then we had a close reading of the Rick Steves graduation speech that he gave this year online, which, by the way, got a lot of good feedback on that episode. So we might be doing something a bit similar in the future. No,
and the next episode could just be your sketchy, kind of creepy notes to Rick Steves or something.
dear Mr. Steves.
When I was back home in Maryland, I spoke to my parents about the podcast, regular listeners out there.
Absolutely.
And they both love Rick Steves. So I figured it out. You love Rick Steves so much because deep at heart, you're sort of a boomer,
that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So
God,
my mom had his DVDs out,
I do think honestly, in my heart, I feel like I'm older than a boomer. I don't.
Right.
These boomers, a lot of those were hippies. I'm no hippie.
No, you're like Edward Gorey out there
in my fur coat on the beach.
Yeah.
Now, Ryan, we have two major announcements about Rick Steves. The first is he's got a new book out, and it's called For the Love of Europe. And this is not Rick Steves as a guide. It is Rick Steves as a tourist and a lover of Europe, recounting some of his most memorable stories and moments from his many decades of traveling throughout Europe.
Do you think he covers all the free, all the free souvenirs that he's conned off of?
That he's stolen from impoverished craftsmen?
Just because he's Rick Steves, nobody wants to have him pay for anything.
And Ryan, I have a bit of a fun exercise for us, which is I thought we could play the audio on the Rick Steves Europe website. They've posted just a short clip of Rick Steves reading just a little bit of his book, For the Love of Europe. Thought we could play it for a moment and then we could discuss it.
Oh, I love that idea.
All right. So I'm going to hit play right now. You ready?
Ready.
But Lorenzo, who ran Il Castello, was a rare Vernazzen who didn't take advantage of tourists held captive by his town's beauty. He'd sit me down under an umbrella with the most commanding view in town, and then with the love of a small-town priest, he'd put a cookie next to my glass of cool, sweet Chakitra wine and say, "Rest here, the view is nice." Wow, I am just about done reading this brand new book Rick Steves for the Love of Europe. And I am so excited to be sharing with you my 100 favorite travel adventures in his collection of essays. If any book that I've written over the years is just made to order for an audiobook, it's got to be this one. I've been in this recording booth now for 5 7-hour stints, and I'm so excited about this book. If you're looking for an audiobook to take you to Europe, to stoke your travel dreams, be sure to get Rick Steves for the Love of Europe.
First of all, I mean, the man's a dream. And is he not a perfect match for this podcast? I mean,
was that a story of a priest putting wine and cookies down? I mean, I hope he's old enough.
With the love of a small town priest, being plied with wine and cookies by a priest. I mean, that's what being an altar boy is all about.
It's not wine; it's Jesus juice.
I think the book does sound pretty compelling. I love, and we'll link to the video in the show notes. But there's like a B-roll of him traveling in Europe at the start, and it's him being like looking at a local, and he's being like, "Is this how you eat bread? You put it in your mouth?" And like, "Oh, the wine goes in the glass that is for wine." And then he rings a bell, and he has this big smile, like, "The bells in Europe ring." This is obviously a must read. And, don't you think he needs to be out on the promotion tour?
Yeah. I mean, if everybody knows, if you want to sell books, you come on the Out of Office podcast. It's like the Colbert bump all over again.
The Colbert bump, you go to the New York Times book review, and then you come on Out of Office.
What Oprah did for Jonathan Franzen, we could do for Rick Steves.
Well, it's interesting you take it to that place because the last piece of the quest for Rick Steves that we just need to update on is I had a follow-up note from our recent guest, Connor Knighton, the correspondent from CBS Sunday Morning who traveled to all the national parks and wrote a book about it. And he said, Kieran, I can't resist bragging to you about my next assignment. And what do you think Connor got assigned to do but go to Rick Steves' house and record an interview with him?
Now, could we use, because Connor, that was a good interview. You all got along,
we got along great. I believe after your first listen to it, you said, get a room.
It was tough it should have a parental advisory, that episode, it makes folks uncomfortable. But I feel like we could just ask him to say, look, it's not so bad,
That's interesting. So you're suggesting... are you suggesting that he get Rick to come onto the show, or you're suggesting that maybe he could just hand us the audio of the interview and we could play it as if it is our interview?
I think having Rick be on the show would be more powerful.
I like the idea of just dubbing over our voices where Connor's and asking the same question.
Well, I mean, we could do that with any interview Rick's posted on YouTube. We could get Rick on, live with Regis and Kathy Lee.
Well, listen, it is my hope. I didn't feel that I could ask Connor to blatantly plug us, but he knows about the quest for Rick Steves. I'm waiting for the email to come back in, and I really do hope that Connor might have just slipped in a little bit of hey, there's this great travel podcast. I think you'd fit in great. They're not creeps at all, and one of them is not obsessed with you.
I just worry that if he says that he'll be escorted out of Rick Steves' house at that point,
This is why we can do it remotely right now. We're all at home. It's perfect. He's safe, and I get my Rick Steves interview.
Well, I think that I feel like this is a step in the right direction. I do. We're now one removed from Rick Steves.
So now, Ryan, we're going to do a really quick takeoff, I think, where we can just give a summary of what we're up to, what we've been up to, and where we're going in the future episodes. And then everybody's favorite segment, The Last Stop. So why don't we take off?
Flight attendants?
Tell the cabin crew. We always forget how to do that.
Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff, please.
All right, we are in the air. It feels so good to be up in the air. It's been
I hate when you do this. Just because we take off, it does not mean that we're pretending to be in a plane, recording on a plane. So for the meat of this episode, we should just both recount, when we last left off, neither of us had left our respective homes for a very long time. COVID is still ravaging the United States. There's still travel bans all over the place. So, Ryan, where are you, and what kind of episodes can we expect from your experiences over the last couple months?
So I, borrowed my mom's car and decided to sort of drive out to Tennessee, out south. And I'm in Tennessee. Spent a little time in Knoxville and the Smoky Mountain area. Spent a little time in Chattanooga around the Lookout Mountain area, and now I'm in Nashville. And I think we're going to have some, two really good episodes on both the Knoxville Smoky Mountain area and the Chattanooga Lookout Mountain area. It's really beautiful spaces. Got a lot of hiking in, a lot of swimming in the creeks out here.
And as a Southern boy yourself, you probably feel very at home.
I do. I feel I haven't stepped on a scale in 7 weeks, which is frightening because there's a lot of barbecue. I think a lot less sushi out here, a lot more barbecue.
Sure.
Probably hasn't been good for the old waistline. But it's been great to get out of New York and to, be able to be in a backyard. And at night go for a walk, take a stroll in the woods. So it's been good.
That sounds like a good escape. I think the car road trip is a very good way to go in COVID times. And this is similarly what Catherine and I did, which is as we were getting May and June, and it was clear that we were not going to be able to do any of the trips that we had planned in that time. We had talked about going to Yellowstone. We talked about going to Portugal. All of these things, of course, shelved. So we got on Airbnb and rented a very lovely cottage that is in a place in Maine called Beals Island, Maine. And for those who know Maine, basically, if you drove to Portland and then you drove 3.5 to 4 hours north of that. So it is quite high up in quite a rural area, real working community of lobstermen and lobster traps everywhere. And we were close to the Canadian border, but of course could not cross it. And we spent a great week in Maine visiting Acadia National Park, some standout state parks, and just having a good, refreshing, relaxing time. And I don't know if you're finding this, Ryan, but different parts of the country are just experiencing COVID in such vastly different ways. Maine has an extremely low rate. And before you travel in, most states, you have to take a COVID test to prove negative. We did that. And there was actually the closest sense of normalcy that I've had since March.
It's in Tennessee, there's still a lot of COVID cases.
Yeah.
And there's different levels of mask adherence depending on, what city we're in. Like Chattanooga seemed to have a population that was much more had embraced the mask ordinance versus Knoxville, where it was probably 70-30.
So would you say that mask wearing was commencing in Chattanooga? And we just lost all our listeners.
Yeah, I can't believe you're wasting that joke. I'm not going to let you use it again.
Should I save it? No, I'm definitely saying it in the Tennessee episode. And just to save that, I will not reveal what that is from because we know none of our listeners will know.
No, our listeners would definitely not know.
And so we're going to have some great episodes about Maine, about Tennessee, the Great Smoky National Parks, Acadia National Parks. And, we're doing our best to still get out there and bring fresh new travel content to the pod. And I think, too, we should offer ideas about how our listeners can, get some travel in these COVID times, and particularly in the next couple months for fear that there be a second wave or the flu season gets really horrible. Now is a time to get in your car if you can, to take some vacation days if you're lucky enough to have a job, and try to just refresh your mind and yourself in these tumultuous times.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are definitely ways that are safe that you can get out with the family, and we're gonna have some good tips.
And Ryan, I should also note, we've decided, we were at the beginning of this pandemic, we were having a really difficult time knowing how often we should put out a podcast. It can be callous to talk about traveling with so much death and difficulty and pain and financial struggle going on in this country and all over the world. So, but that said, we've heard from many fans who reached out and said, I look forward to this podcast and you need to keep it going and we need these mental escapes. And I know I feel that way with my favorite podcast. So you and I have said what we're going to do is we're going to do every other week until things feel like they're getting a bit closer to normal, until the world gets back on its feet a bit. So our summer break is over. We're committed and we're back to every other week. And at some point, we will likely come back to every week, but only when we feel like the world's ready for it and when we feel mentally ready for it.
Yeah, I think that is fair to say. I mean, we are as much as anybody looking forward to the days when travel can resume and we can get back to this full time. Full time for us.
Yeah, no, full time. Yeah, it's 40 hours a week, just making these 1 hour episodes every other week. And maybe we'll drop some special surprises in there in between those episodes. But you gotta continue to subscribe to get those. So Ryan, with that, I think it's time that we get to the last stop.
Last stop.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last stop on this train. Everyone, please leave the train.
Now, Ryan, this is the last stop. It's the final segment of the show. It's your favorite segment, my favorite segment. It's popularly known as the People segment. And it is a moment where we pause and we reflect and we commune with the experiences that we have had, that we are having, that we will have in the future. And we each identify one thing, just one. You don't have to come with a panoply of things, just the one thing. It could be something you cooked, something you drank, something you ate, something you ordered. It could be a piece of travel gear. It could be just a fond memory. Maybe it's a postcard that you received from a friend. Anything that fed the spirit of wanderlust within us, even during the workaday week. So, Ryan, I have to ask you this week, as I have asked every week in the past, do you have a last stop this week?
I do have a last stop this week. So I've been reading a lot more. So I've been attempting to read more novels by Black authors, and two recent novels that I've read, Beloved by Toni Morrison and The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead, both fantastic novels that deal with slavery in America, the history of slavery in America. And one of them, The Underground Railroad, which won the Pulitzer a few years ago, is has this kind of fascinating magical realist take on the Underground Railroad as like a concept. And I really urge folks to get out and read it because it will surprise you in a lot of ways. But I've been, in the South, and, I grew up in Eastern Shore, Maryland, and, have toured plantations like Monticello and other, less famous ones in Virginia and in Maryland. And, they talk a little bit about slavery when you do those tours. Less than they did, I think more so now. And certainly Monticello has gone a long way.
Yes.
But when I was in high school, when I was doing these tours, it would be mentioned in a very casual way.
Yes.
So while I'm here in Nashville, went to check out the Belle Meade Plantation, which has in just over the last couple of years put together a new tour called The Journey to Jubilee, which actually tells the stories of a handful of folks who lived as slaves on this plantation from the years 1807 all the way through to emancipation. And you get to sort of hear, get to see where these folks lived, how they lived, their accomplishments on the plantation. You get to hear a lot of their words. It was just a really interesting tour. And unlike, the Belle Meade Plantation was always sort of focused on horses and raising horses for mostly for sport. So it wasn't sort of a cash crop plantation, which is the ones that I've really toured in Virginia and Maryland, where it's all about tobacco or cotton. This was like a more idyllic looking place. It was it had these big beautiful a horse farm as opposed to sort of a cash crop situation. So I'd never really been on that kind of property. So one of the really interesting things was these folks who lived before emancipation and after emancipation, they had incredibly different lives, right? So one of the guys on the plantation was named Bob Green, and he was an extraordinary horse trainer. And after emancipation, he actually stayed on the farm on Belle Meade and continued to train horses as a free man. He was given his own house there. He was the highest paid of all the black folks on that farm at the time. And he lived to become a incredibly famous figure in horse racing in the late 1800s. When he died in 1906, his obituary was published in the New York Times. So to give you an idea of like the fame that this guy rose to in his field, he was considered, one of the best horse trainers in the country at the time. And he raced in the Kentucky Derby. He had a horse that won the Kentucky Derby that he owned independently.
Wow.
So just a really, really interesting character. And he sort of reminds you that, even though these folks were literally owned, they were able to, some of them were able to, especially after emancipation, sort of chart their own sort of courses. And it was a cool opportunity to learn about some of these people. And many of the descendants of people who actually lived on that plantation, were enslaved on that plantation, are involved in putting together the history around this tour and, descendants. So it reminds you of how, somebody's great grandchild can be on a video talking about how their great grandmother lived on Belle Meade. It doesn't seem that far away. There are still people that are connected to this thing in American history, which is so important to understand.
Wow, that was a very heavy last stop, but important. Can you see that obituary online today?
Yeah, I'll link folks to Bob Green's page. He's a really interesting.
Oh, really?
guy.
When you're writing up the show notes, you'll link them?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's really convenient that you do that work for the show.
Well, I do. Folks know that I keep the podcast going.
I do think you sort of violated the last stop rule of bring one thing. You named 2 books. You're naming tours you're doing. You profiles on specific lives.
The book sort of pulled me into, made me want to kind of seek this out. So. That was the connection there.
I think I haven't read Beloved, and that should absolutely be at the top of my list. The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead, I have read, and I thought was extraordinarily good.
Yeah, I have to tell you, I thought it was going to be a much more straightforward history because I just read Beloved.
No,
but it's
an alternate world.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's an alternate world where there is a physical Underground Railroad, which I thought maybe that conceit was going to feel cheap, but I think it totally works.
It totally works. Yeah.
Well, I have a significantly more lighthearted, but I think in a future episode, I'll come back with such a moving and educational one because now mine just seems very frivolous. I mean, this is the end of summer episode,
Is there more beans?
It's not more beans, but it's not far off. Which is, Ryan, I'm a beer drinker. I enjoy a beer, a brew. And one of the great things...
Not too many, though,
Well... it's been some long months in the house. And one thing that's great about Maine is Portland, Maine is a great beer town. I mean, they have so many breweries. I think I even read that they have more breweries per capita than any other U.S. city. And you can find these great rankings of best breweries in Portland. And Catherine and I were not staying in Portland. We have visited Portland before, but we were passing through it and making a point to get off, get some good food, and importantly, get some good beer. And so I consulted some of these lists, and what I discovered, of course, in the age of COVID, is that it can be difficult to go into these places to retrieve your beer. You got to order curbside, you got to order a week in advance, you got to be there at a particular time. And I was extremely happy to find that there is a great, renowned brewery called Austin Street Brewery. And Austin Street Brewery has a killer American IPA called Florens, Florens. It hits a 94 on beeradvocate.com, which for beer drinkers, people know that's like a difficult grade to achieve there.
I am so glad that somebody's advocating for beer. For too long, beer has had no advocate.
And we unfortunately got stuck in a very long line of cars trying to pick up from the brewery called Bissell Brothers. And that beer is extraordinarily good, though. But Austin Street Brewery, great beer, easy to walk in. You could buy it like a snap, take it in your car with your screaming infant, be home and drink it. So I'm enjoying my Florins. My refrigerator is full of it. And what I love about, food and drink souvenirs is that they can last for a while and they can really transport you back to the place. And so I'm still on my main high right now, even though I'm back in Boston and surrounded by COVID.
Sounds like a very potent
highly potent. Now I know why you're saying that, because it fits the 3 P's of souvenirs, which, Ryan, are again
potency.
Potency is right. That's usually the one you forget.
Potency, and then practicality, and
nope.
Price.
Price. You always come back to price, because when you think about it for a second, you're like, it's price. Practicality is not a bad guess. It's portability.
Oh, well, that's practicality and portability are very similar.
They're pretty interchangeable. Maybe practicality is even better. I will say beer not as portable, so it's a little weaker on the souvenir front.
Well, if you drink it, you can just bring it with you.
Oh, that's that's highly portable. All right. Well, Ryan, I think that's where we should end it. It's great to be back in the seat with you. I've missed you. We've been in touch, but there's nothing like getting on the mics with you. And I can't wait to record more and hear about your travels through Tennessee. Well, Ryan, on the next episode, as much as I would love to dive into your Tennessee adventures, I must say, I feel the need to get you back on your fancy mic before I allow you to do that. So we're going to cover my road trip through Maine, going to talk about Acadia National Park, some of the state parks, and some of the lesser-known, smaller, rural juror. We're going to talk about Acadia, some of the state parks, and some of the more rural areas of Maine in the next episode.
Well, that sounds fantastic. I'm looking forward to it. Maine's one of the only states I haven't been to.
I do know that, and I'm very proud.
Well, until then, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, Back to a Travel podcast.
The seat disinfected.
Did you bring me some of that beer?
No. What are you bringing me from Tennessee?
Maybe some whiskey, some Tennessee whiskey, sipping whiskey.
Looks like you're bringing back maybe 25 pounds.
Oh, too true.
All right.